Hi everybody. I'm Ross Hill. I am the founder of Insight Forward, which is a geopolitical risk advisory service, mainly supporting corporate clients and really focusing on strategic intelligence, long-term risks, and long-term outlooks. Today, I am joined by Rico Hellegren
Hello.
and from Clock and Cloud Intelligence. I'll let Riku introduce himself in a second. But we thought it would be a good idea to get together and kind of have a chat about one of the major issues that is going on at the moment, which is the Israel and Hamas war in Gaza, and maybe start to look a little bit at what the environment in Israel might be like after the war ends. I mean, we don't think it's premature to start talking about that right now. We don't think probably the end of the war is coming tomorrow, but it will come at some point. And I think there's possibly going to be some substantial changes for businesses operating in Israel. And we just wanted to have a chat about it. But Riku, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hello everybody. My name is Riku Helgren, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Clock and Cloud Intelligence. And basically, my background is in the Finnish Defense Forces, and we established our company approximately 1 year ago. And now we are in a situation where we have first clients for our app. We have a solid team of 9 people working towards our goal. And what Clock and Cloud Intelligence is about, we are a B2B SaaS company that specializes in delivering actionable geopolitical understanding. And through our product, we aim to make geopolitical risks understandable and actionable for companies from different industries. That's basically the short version of everything.
Okay, Riku. So, I think we should probably talk about kind of a little bit about how we got to where we are now. So some context around it. So, everybody's going to be aware of the Hamas attack on Israel, terrible terrorist attack that caused a significant Israeli military response that's now lasted for, a good, 8 or 9 months into it now of consistent military action of Israel moving through Gaza down now into Rafah, where the kind of main operation is focused. I think at the beginning, I think people were quite supportive of Israel, their right to respond to that attack and do something. As time's gone on, as the humanitarian kind of disaster in Gaza has kind of worsened and worsened, there's a lot of kind of pushback against what Israel is doing now. So, can we think about kind of some, timelines here, some scenarios maybe of what do you think is going to happen in the short term?
Should we kind of like jump into our app, and if we can see the scenarios that we have for the next 6 months?
Yeah. Yeah, let's take a look.
Basically, this is the look of our app, and when we go to the situation and event in the Middle East, and more specifically into Israel-Middle East tensions, our scenarios for the next 6 months, based on our estimations, we think that likely scenario is that high tensions and continue, and overall the continuation of escalations, but no massive spillover. We think it is possible that Israel breaks the dishes, which basically means either indirect strike against Iran or direct, maybe even direct strike against Iran. But that is estimated as unlikely, or very, very unlikely as of now. But we think that the invasion of southern Lebanon is something that is kind of like included within our possible scenario. And then unlikely as of now for the next 6 months is the ceasefire with the prospect for cessation of hostilities. And if we, for example, slightly focus on the likely scenario, high tensions and continuation of escalations, in this scenario, basically the hostilities in the Gaza and in overall between Israel and Iran and Iranian proxies remain high without the spillover into regional war. And within this development, no common ground can't basically be found. Neither Israel nor Hamas seems to be willing to find a path towards ceasefire, and hostilities between all parties remain high without intense further escalation. And with intense further escalation, we basically mean a regional war. And obviously, this relates to other events that we have on the app. And for example, the Red Sea crisis dynamics. You can see the influencers here, but basically the likely scenario is the same, that high tensions and continuation of escalation, no massive spillover, and no common ground can be found between the different parties, Houthis, US-led coalition, Israel, Hamas, Islamic resistance in general, and yeah. So those are our scenarios what comes to next 6 months when we estimate the Middle East tensions as a whole, basically.
Okay, yeah, and I think when you're looking at kind of the scenarios that you've got there, I mean, I know from our perspective, really what we're looking at is the Israeli offensive. You know, Israel planning to carry on its offensive in Rafah for as long as it deems necessary. And from our point of view, maybe one of the key indicators we're looking at for an outlook is Israel in some way declaring that it's defeated Hamas, militarily, whether that's a realistic thing, actually to achieve or not is a different discussion. But, I don't know what you're thinking about in terms of kind of what your kind of key indicators are for some of your scenarios at the moment.
Yeah. For example, the high tensions and continuation of escalation, we think one of the main indicators for that are obviously that we will continue to see the continuation of the tit for tat strikes between Israel and Iranian proxies. But I think what is important to understand is the scope of the damage that is created with those strikes. And obviously, we are constantly monitoring peace negotiations. And one of the indicators for our likely scenario is that we will not see a breakthrough in these peace negotiations between Israel and Hamas.
Yeah.
And then if we go to the more detailed level, Israel, one of the indicators is that Israel is not able to return hostages from Gaza. Iran doesn't strike directly against Israel, because otherwise that's kind of like the indicator for regional war. And obviously we are looking for the stance of the United States and what kind of involvement US will have when the situation evolves further. And we are looking for that US keeps the stance of supporting Israel, but do not provide support for a larger war. And then obviously we believe, and one of our indicators for this likely scenario is that Houthis keep their operations running against commercial shipping in the Red Sea.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The Houthis have shown the damage they can cause. It's proven very difficult to stop what they're doing. I don't see any reason for them to stop, even if Israel declares a kind of pause in fighting, or Israel declares that it's kind of ended its operation in Rafah. I mean, that doesn't necessarily fully mean that the war will stop, because as we know, there is no clear plan for kind of governance in Gaza after the war ends. Hamas will still exist as kind of like a political type organization, has offices in foreign countries, still has a lot of popularity and a lot of influence amongst the Palestinians in Gaza itself. So it's a really uncertain outlook. And an uncertain outlook in Gaza obviously makes the security situation in Israel much more tricky as well. So I don't know if you've been thinking about any kind of scenarios for what Gaza might look like when the sort of fighting ends, so to speak.
Yeah, we haven't done that in a detail because our focus as of now. We have the event, the Israel Middle East tensions in our app, which is basically kind of like looking the situation as a whole. And then we have a more focused point in Iraq, and then we have a more focused point on the situation in the Red Sea and the Red Sea dynamics, basically. But what I think will happen in the Gaza after the war, I think there are a lot of potential scenarios. Personally, I don't believe the Palestinian Authority to be kind of like legitimate enough from the eyes of the Gazan people and the Palestinian people in general.
Yeah.
And yeah, obviously there is potential for UN to kind of like lead this some sort of middle phase, and but I think there is a lot of problems with what comes to capabilities and efficiency of the UN to handle the situation in general. But if we think that from the perspective of what other organizations would be able to do something like this, there basically is none. So if the international organizations will have a part to play, I think the UN is basically the only solution because of the somewhat neutral stance and stuff like that. And then obviously there are a lot of these discussions going on all the time about the Hamas and what will be the future of Hamas. Obviously Israel is trying to destroy Hamas, and that's one of the goals of Netanyahu what comes to war as of now. But I think that Hamas is not going to go anywhere, and we are seeing a lot of indicators that when we discuss about the damage that Israel has done to Hamas, what comes to military capabilities, etc., etc. But if we kind of like take a bigger look for the whole situation, I think the recruitment of Hamas has been pretty solid, and they have gained a lot of new members to join their forces and yeah, and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at what's happened previously with conflicts with Israel and Hamas, Hamas has always managed to
Yeah.
reorganize, rearm, recruit, and it's difficult to see that being any different this time. Like you say, there's a whole new generation, probably of radicalized Palestinians to
Yeah.
recruit from now. One of the critical things is going to be how the borders are controlled, how goods and things move
Yeah.
into Gaza. Previously Israel has tried to really kind of put strict limits on things like construction materials that could be used for building tunnels, for materials that could be used for building bombs, to try and stop the flow of weapons
Yeah.
into the area. But, they've really not ever been truly successful at that. And
Yeah.
it's difficult to see, unless Israel retains full control of the borders in Gaza, it feels like, well, how is it going to be any different this time? Hamas retains willing backers in Iran and elsewhere. So, it's going to be a very difficult balancing act for Israel
Yeah.
to allow enough humanitarian aid in to
Yeah.
Gaza
Yeah. Yeah.
to help with the
Yeah.
reconstruction in the longer term, to help with the basic needs of the people in Gaza as well, versus kind of like restricting Hamas and other groups,
Yeah.
within Gaza from basically rearming,
Yeah.
and Hamas likely moving towards more of like an insurgency or a terrorist style
Yeah.
organization in the shorter term as well, posing some additional challenges there. And when we're looking at some of like the scenarios, kind of as you said, is it going to be like Israel kind of buffer zone, or Israel maintains some kind of governance, with some like Palestinian local committees, which is something Israel has talked about, doesn't seem too viable. Palestinian Authority is kind of favored by the US and some other regional countries, Jordan and Egypt, maybe. But like you say, I mean, the
Yeah.
PLA really doesn't have a lot of credibility in
Yeah.
Gaza and hasn't for several years.
Yeah.
When you look at survey data, it still says the Palestinians in Gaza still say they think Hamas was right to launch the attack. They
Yeah.
still favor Hamas as a governing organization. You know, they still want Hamas to be there. So to try and impose any other kind of governance on them is just going to cause, like, you know, it's more instability in the longer term, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the Israeli controlled buffer zone, for example, I think it would lack the international support,
Yeah.
and that's yeah. There are also a lot of problems what comes to that, and in addition, not just discussing about the Hamas, but also the Hezbollah. It's basically the same thing what comes to the capabilities of Hezbollah to keep conducting their operations and stuff like that. I spent 4 months in Lebanon. I came back a little bit over 1 year ago, but basically, you can so much learn, obviously, from the books and from the academics, and try to understand the basic nature of these different organizations. But yeah, I think my time in Lebanon truly provided me with some deeper level understanding that, when everybody's kind of like trying to grasp the structure of these organizations and how they operate, and I think many times people kind of like assume that these organizations, they basically start from somewhere and they end to somewhere, and it's kind of like easy to understand package that you can kind of like try to manage. But what I learned in southern Lebanon, I basically learned that Hezbollah is everything in there. It runs schools, hospitals, support local people, more than the government, actually, a lot more. And Hezbollah is not just the guy with the rifle. It's also, I would say, it's also some 14-year-old boy driving around with his scooter, for example, and monitoring the UN peacekeepers, and making sure that if they go somewhere that they shouldn't be going, the organization, the Hezbollah, will be alerted by that. Or Hezbollah is living in the cafeterias in southern Lebanon where there is, let's say, 4 older women having a cafe, and all of them are wearing the kind of like the widow rings that they have lost their husbands in different fights against Israel. And yeah, but basically what I'm trying to say is I got some level of understanding that how complex those organizations are as a whole. And I think the same goes with Hamas and with the Gaza Strip, basically. I don't know if you got the point what I tried to say, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I do understand what you're saying. You know, you see it said sort of quite a lot about Hamas in particular, where it's like you can't defeat an ideology, kind of thing. So Hamas is more than just like its militant wing.
Yeah.
You know, it goes much further than that, and Hezbollah probably to an even possibly to an even greater extent, as you just explained. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And overall, if we think about that, like you said, that people in Gaza, they still think that the Hamas is the only option after the war, basically, that will
yeah,
be the having the power in the Gaza. I think, to be honest, what this means also is that based on how I see it is, no matter the solution, because obviously Hamas most likely can't be the solution. So no matter the solution, it will not provide longer term stabilization. I think some sort of seed for hatred for decades is there. And it is obviously because of this Hamas attack, but also because of the Israeli and how they responded to attack and what's the situation as of now. So I think it's very, very hard to find some sort of longer term solution, even though obviously, like you said, that there are these Western nations that are recognizing the state of Palestine, and even there would be some sort of two-state solution, which has been obviously on the table for a long period of time. Even that most likely doesn't provide the overall stabilization. Some sort of violent seed is there, and it's very hard to find the overall solution.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's no any of the scenarios that we've talked about or we look at, I don't think provide any stability
Yeah,
necessarily for Gaza, and then by extension, we'll see greater instability, for Israel too. And I think, for businesses in particular, Israel's been, you know, a sort of high performing economy. It's attracted a lot of investment, particularly in the tech sectors. Um, and people still want access to Israeli research and development and technology and those kind of things. And so I think probably from the kinds of clients that you and I will deal with, there'll be a lot of concern about what the future outlook is in
yeah,
Israel itself. So I'd like to kind of talk about that a little too.
yeah.
Looking at some of the impacts we've already seen from the war itself, and then what some of the future impacts might be.
Yeah, yeah. I think overall there will be huge impacts. Obviously, the business environment. Obviously, we can say that one scenario is that things will return somewhat normal in some period of time. And like you said, there are a lot of interest from especially from the Western companies, and yeah, but that is not so simple, because obviously you will. I think we start to see a lot of damage to reputation what comes to overall to the situation in Israel and in Middle East as a whole, and I think companies will have to face and are facing already boycotts, for example, and the demonstrations within these big Western tech companies where developers are saying that they don't want to build something that relates to the situation, and yeah, so I think there will be a lot of different kind of risks what comes to reputation management. But obviously, like one time we discussed this same topic basically, we noticed that there is also risks for reputation for not supporting Israel if we are talking about the Western corporations, for example. But yeah, and overall, when we think about the supply chains, maritime routes, I think especially in the short term, there will be, and there already obviously are, a lot of impacts that have an effect to the whole global economy, basically.
Yeah, I would agree with that. One of the things we're looking at in terms of like longer term risks is the continuation of that reputational risk for,
Yeah,
operating in Israel, having a supply chain,
yeah,
that's partly in Israel, and facing pressure from various activist groups, like BDS, which are probably the most prominent one, putting pressure on a number of companies to stop doing business in Israel. But it's from all stakeholders now is what we see. This kind of environment for businesses where your whole stakeholder environment, so that could be your investors, consumers, clients, your employees. They have this thing of they want shared values with companies that they work for, buy from, and
yeah,
that kind of thing. So if you're not seen to be sharing those values, you'll face pressure, as with Google and Amazon, and as you quite rightly said, the number of people we've seen criticized for siding with the Palestinians as well.
yeah,
So it's not just an anti-Israel kind of thing. There is a pro-Israel lobby as well,
yeah,
which is putting companies in a very difficult kind of position to be able to kind of maintain operations in Israel.
yeah,
Um, but it's been an interesting one from an economic perspective. Obviously, initially when the war started, we saw a significant hit to the Israeli economy,
yeah,
as it had to massively increase spending, called up huge number of reservists that hit economic activity. Um, it lost a lot of kind of workers from not allowing Palestinian workers in areas like construction and agriculture, which slowed down economic activity as well. But
yeah,
then, after about 3 months or so, we've kind of seen that recover quite a bit. Although it's harder to recover kind of that level of increased spending and things like that. So that will hurt
Yeah.
Israel for a little bit. Historically, if you look back at kind of similar, it's not exactly the same, but similar conflicts like the Second Lebanon War in 2006,
Yeah.
really it took a good couple of years for the Israeli economy to recover fully from that. And I would kind of say that the domestic political and international political and geopolitical kind of environment was probably not as difficult as maybe we're seeing from the latest conflict with Hamas.
Yeah.
So I think there's some definite challenges to Israel's recovery over the next couple of years or so.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, obviously, and I also think it is important to think about the overall what will be the domestic politics like in Israel after the war, and what kind of scenarios we have for that. Is there a possibility for Netanyahu to stay in power? Will we have an kind of like even more right wing government in Israel, or some moderate government that will try to solve the issue for good, basically? But yeah, I think there is a lot of different scenarios that are very realistic, and it's obviously very hard to estimate as of now what will be the outcome for Israel, economically wise, like you mentioned, but also from the perspective of domestic politics of Israel.
Yeah, well, politically, that's a really interesting one. You have Netanyahu, allied himself to those kind of more of the far right or hard right
Yeah,
parties in order to essentially save himself politically.
yeah,
The corruption charges and other things that he's facing domestically that are a big issue while he's in power. He can't stand trial for those. And so it's within his interest to keep his current coalition happy and going. The difficulty with that is they've got, very, very strong opinions on which way the war should go, which is to carry on. They favor Israel occupying Gaza and having Jewish settlements there. They
yeah,
favor, once that war ends, straight away, war with Hezbollah in
yeah,
southern Lebanon. So, that and anything, and anything below those they may not agree to. So that's making it really, really difficult for Netanyahu to kind of have any kind of ceasefire agreement or any plan for governance of Gaza too,
yeah,
um, which is making kind of the outlook really uncertain here. We had Benny Gantz in the war cabinet
yeah,
that was providing maybe a slightly more moderate stance.
yeah,
He's obviously left that. The
yeah,
war cabinet's been dissolved. So we're now in a bit more of an uncertain situation on where we go. Gantz is calling for elections. Others in Israel protests against Netanyahu's government quite frequently.
yeah,
It's difficult to see, can that government survive? First of all, what many perceive as kind of like the failure of allowing the Hamas attack.
yeah,
Then can it survive not being able to return the hostages?
yeah,
Then can it survive what's happened in the war, Israel's international standing, domestic issues? Look, it looks very difficult for that government. Previously, after a lot of the wars Israel been involved in, they've had a lot of commissions investigating kind of intelligence failures, the conduct in the war, and those kinds of things that's kind of forced politicians to resign. Are we going to see something similar to that? Investigations into the overall kind of what happened with the Hamas attack, kind of how Israel's conducted itself in the war. The question is, can Netanyahu even kind of keep his coalition together to hang on?
yeah,
Israeli coalitions are notoriously unstable at the best of times, and now that just seems to be worse.
yeah. Yeah, and I think also what should be included is the kind of like the perception of people of Israel. I don't know if you have any kind of latest opinions data from Israel and how people see this situation and yeah, but I think overall there are within Israel there is also a lot of different opinions and somewhat, because I think normally when country wages a war, it kind of like unites the country. But in case of Israel and in case this war, obviously when Hamas attacked, the Israel was united, and everybody agreed that yes, we should respond and respond with power. But when it was seen by the, I would say, average people, normal people within Israel, that okay, getting hostages back doesn't look good, and yeah, so I think there is also a lot of kind of like polarization within the Israel itself, what comes to political opinions and the opinions about this war in general, and that might and will most likely have also an impact on the post-war kind of like Israel domestic political situation, because it at the end of the day, Israel is a democracy and people can vote their leaders. And
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if you have any opinions on that, or if you have latest understanding what's the perception of people of Israel.
Yeah, I mean the some of the latest polling I've seen, Gantz was certainly leading in the sense of, the perception of politicians' performance within the war itself.
Yeah,
Gantz was above with I think with the head of the IDF were kind of polling quite well, but Netanyahu and then a couple of others on his cabinet, were polling quite badly in terms of how people perceive their performance. So,
yeah,
and I think I think you're probably right to mention the kind of the
yeah,
hostages as the key point in that. I mean, the failure to kind of like return hostages has been a big issue.
yeah,
Um, it just seems, you feel like Netanyahu will try to cling on to power for sure after the war ends.
yeah,
It's just, how long can he actually do that? I mean, you can't see a way of him agreeing a ceasefire that his coalition partners are going to agree to as well. So I don't know. The outlook is uncertain for sure. And then we have to move to the question. It's like, well, how much influence will the far right continue to have in government formation again if there is another election? Israel went through several years of, several elections, not being able to form a stable government.
yeah,
And so that doesn't look good. And then obviously for then, recovery efforts after the war in terms of, economic and social stability and, new legislation driving the economy forward again with an unstable government, that's going to be much more difficult.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Do you think is there any kind of possibility for Israel to end up some sort of internal, and I mean real turbulence, internal violence or anything like that? Obviously, everything is possible, basically, but do you see any indicators for that happening as of now?
No, I don't. No, I don't think so.
Yeah,
I don't have major concerns about that. I mean, you see large-scale protests.
yeah,
Um, I think I worry more about kind of the security environment, and increased risks of terrorism,
yeah,
increased risks of kind of unrest in the West Bank,
yeah,
big issues in Jerusalem, and that kind of, in terms of like internal instability, that's kind of what I would probably be more concerned about. Honestly, I don't. Israel has a lot of political concerns, but I don't see that becoming kind of violent.
yeah,
And then one of the other things I've seen in terms of kind of how people are reacting to what's been going on in Israel is that kind of emigration
mm,
of people wanting to leave the country.
mm,
We started to see it when Netanyahu's government was trying to bring in judicial reforms, and we saw large scale protests, and we saw people then kind of moving away from Israel. Uh, and I think, the security situation that we've seen over the last 6 months, you know, th- does that drive that as another issue? That kind of
yeah,
brain drain of like this endless kind of cycle that we seemingly have of conflict within Israel every few years. People becoming tired of that, and knowing that they've got skills that are desired in other developed countries,
yeah,
and just wanting to kind of like move away, and Israel losing a lot of it's skilled workers in that sense, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Makes sense overall. Yeah,
Yeah, but particularly in the high tech sector, which is
yeah,
kind of what everybody, well, not everybody, but that's like a largest part of Israeli investment, foreign direct investment into the tech sector and things like that. And so that's something I would kind of be concerned about as well, in the slightly longer term.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and how about if we kind of like put this situation in Middle East to larger context, and we think about the global kind of like geopolitical environment as of now, and obviously there is this huge power competition going on, mostly between United States and China, and as of now we are in a situation where US is trying to keep their uh, position as a kind of like leading nation of the world. China is challenging that. Russia is challenging that. There are these emerging superpowers like India, for example. Brazil is making its relevance to be bigger, basically. And yeah, when I think about the overall situation, I think, for example, from the perspective of United States, there will be a lot of issues and a lot of things that they will need to focus on. Is there too much? I don't know, but I think overall the geopolitical situation globally is maybe facing something, and I think the kind of like the baseline is moving towards something new. And then when we go to the more operational tactical level, there are obviously a lot of these different kind of hotspots that has and will have an influence on each other. I don't know, how do you see the whole, if we put that situation in the Middle East to the bigger context, what kind of impacts the situation in the Middle East will have? For example, there is a war in Europe. There are tensions in Taiwan Strait, and a lot of different things going on.
Yeah, it's the US position of, political influence and security kind of guarantees that's being significantly challenged. And everybody is watching for the outcome of these conflicts,
Yeah,
because if the Israel war drags on and on and on, maybe it does move into southern Lebanon. Maybe Iran becomes involved. In that scenario, the US has lost its position as a security guarantor and
yeah,
as the primary influence in the Middle East. And then you could say the same for Russia and Ukraine. If somehow Russia manages to win that war in Ukraine, again, it has the same perception of the US does not have that same level of power and influence that it was perceived to have before. And then that makes it dangerous in other areas, because if the US can be challenged, doesn't stand up, its allies are beaten in
mm,
conflict, then that is a signal to North Korea, to
yeah.
China. Um,
Iran.
yeah, it is kind of like, well, there's, everything's up for grabs then, isn't it?
Yeah,
We talk about it as, it was a unipolar world where the US was the only superpower. Nobody
yeah,
could challenge it economically, militarily. It wielded its influence globally. Now we talk about it as the multipolar world where
yeah,
people don't go to the US as the main guarantor anymore. They're forming smaller regional alliances,
yeah,
and that's partly what we see is creating this greater level of instability, of different regions with different power players, some of the rising powers or middle powers having more influence regionally than the US is able to exert. We've got, the US not having as much influence in Africa or maybe Latin America, and things like that. And that, as a kind of like overview, is
yeah.
kind of how we would say things have developed. And that's, as you say, has created these sorts of global hotspots that we're all concerned about.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think overall, what comes to, for example, Africa, Russia and China has increased a lot of their power in that continent, and when going back to United States, and obviously at the moment we are all trying to figure it out, who will be the next president of the
Yeah.
United States and what kind
Yeah.
of impacts that might have, whether it will be a Biden or if it will be a Trump, and especially the changes that would most likely follow if Trump would come back to power and kind of like have this Trump 2.0, basically saying America first, that the United States will be more focused internally, and that will leave a lot of questions and a lot of uncertainties when we think about the current geopolitical hotspots globally. What kind of stance will United States, for example, to have against the war in Ukraine? What would be the relationships between the US and China, and obviously the situation in the Middle East? And I think there is a lot of dynamics in the background that we have to kind of like try to understand beforehand, and try to analyze the potential scenarios and make sense of what kind of impacts, for example, the second term of Trump being a president of the leading nation of the world would have.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, think regardless, I think regardless of Trump or Biden, the relationship with China will continue to
yeah,
deteriorate.
yeah,
Uh,
that's
you
for
know,
sure. Yeah,
you know, but I think Biden has introduced more trade barriers
yeah,
against China than Trump ever did.
yeah,
So that, there'll be a continuation in that sense. Um, Harder to know around Israel and the Middle East. I don't think Trump is not going to step away from Israel in any way.
yeah,
I think again, Trump or Biden, US, continued military aid and things like that for for Israel will continue. But I think that's fairly assured. It's just how much leverage does the US have to be able to kind of push Israel in the direction that it wants it to go?
yeah,
Trump was pushing ahead with the Abraham Accords and normalizing relations. You can kind of see Trump as the deal maker,
yeah,
trying to create some kind of deal in the Middle East
yeah,
that involves, continued support for Israel in exchange for X, whether that's normalization of relations. Don't think, Trump's had a bit of a harder line on Palestinians, moved the US embassy to Jerusalem, that kind of thing. So that's kind of it's a difficult one to call in that sense, I suppose.
yeah, and
Um,
yeah. Yeah, how about if we think about the impacts on Europe? Obviously, we are based in Finland, and
yeah,
you are based in UK. What do you think in general? What will be the impacts for Europe when we move forward, and especially if Trump would be the president after the elections, and we have all of these geopolitical hotspots going on all around the world. Basically, there are a lot of talks about the European strategic autonomy, but there are obviously a lot of problems also what comes to that, and how
yeah,
realistic it is to basically say that okay, we don't need the assistance of the United States. That's basically not a realistic scenario in the
yeah,
foreseeable future.
yeah,
But I think it's also very important to discuss about the future of Europe as a continent and as a whole, and the role of Europe what comes to managing these different geopolitical hotspots that there is at the moment.
yeah. I think Trump will certainly go back to increasing the pressure on Europe to increase their own defense spending and bring that up
Yeah,
to the actual NATO, required levels.
yeah,
I can't see him have suddenly changing his opinion and having a softer approach on NATO,
yeah, no,
just because of what's happened with Russia.
mm,
So I can imagine him calling for Europe to actually probably increase its support to Ukraine. But we're in that situation where essentially between Europe and the US, we're giving Ukraine enough not to lose, but we're not giving it enough to win.
Mhm.
So we're kind of stuck in
Yeah,
that position, and I don't see how that changes in the shorter term.
yeah,
Um, you know,
yeah, yeah. And actually, uh, within our app, obviously we are monitoring the war in Ukraine, and as of now, our likely scenario for next 6 months is the one where Russia will get a small scale advantage,
hmm
and basically we had an scenario, and we still have a scenario where Ukraine creates the ground for a counterattack early 2025. And that was, for a very long time, that was estimated unlikely by us. And then we got this, then we get to see these different kind of aid packages from states and from European countries, giving more support to Ukraine and giving the permission for Ukraine to use the weapon systems against Russia,
hmm
out, in Russia,
yeah,
basically.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and we are seeing these different kind of indicators that is beneficial for Ukraine, especially for a longer term.
hmm
But like you said, we are giving enough to keep the war ongoing and providing the support for Ukraine to continue their battle against Russia. But basically, I think you're totally right that we are not giving enough support for them to actually beat Russia.
yeah,
And if we think about the perceptions of Russia and Ukraine, how they see the situation as of now, what comes to possible peace negotiations, they are so far apart as of now that obviously, I think the
yeah,
war will not end anytime soon.
yeah. They're just to get again, there's no good outlook, is there?
Yeah,
That we can see at the moment. I don't see Russia. Yes, I don't see Russia being able to have enough of an advantage without doing something drastic um, to force negotiations from
yeah,
Ukraine. And in the same way, Ukraine can hurt Russia, has done over and over, but not enough, to force Putin to negotiate either. So yeah, stalemate and war of attrition continued,
yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah,
Is where we see that.
yeah.
But then, think the other hotspots, I guess, would be say like around the Korean Peninsula or China, Taiwan.
Mhm.
So I don't know, you guys, your scenarios for China, Taiwan.
Yeah. Our scenarios for China, Taiwan, what comes to next 6 months, we are estimating that the very likely scenario as of now is the continuation of the current situation, basically. And in this scenario, the China-Taiwan relations persist, or even slightly, the tensions in China-Taiwan relations, they will persist or even slightly increase within the upcoming months, but do not escalate to a military conflict or even embargo of Taiwan. And so basically, the likely scenario as of now is the continuation of the current situation where Taiwan seeks somewhat peaceful coexistence without the pursuit of independence. But obviously, at the background, we need to understand that China seeks eventual unification and most likely is willing to use force if necessary at some point. But we think that is very unlikely within the next 6 months, basically.
Mhm.
And then our unlikely scenario is the embargo of Taiwan within the next 6 months. And obviously, like I already said, a very unlikely scenario is the invasion of Taiwan. And yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, and yeah, so I think you're right. I mean, I think at, at least from kind of most of what I see, what we kind of think about, the real risk period there is within the next 5 to 6 years or so of armed conflict. So not in the short term. That's probably much further out.
Yeah,
If it even if it even goes that way, I mean, China will continue with its kind of grey zone tactics
yep,
first and foremost, to see if it can kind of, start moving Taiwan more towards kind of reunification, rather than kind of seek a military conflict at this time. But it's certainly, I think I don't want to rule it. I'd never want to rule that out completely in the next few years, given the way things have gone. And this is, going back again. This is why, I feel like the Israel conflict and the Ukraine conflict are so critical now. Their outcomes are so critical.
Yeah.
Because if groups can be shown to kind of get what they want through armed conflict, that that seems to kind of motivate others to do it. I think in the longer term.
Yeah. I think so too. And overall, in the Middle East, there are a lot of different dynamics that are affecting to each other basically as of now, and the impacts for especially businesses that relies on supply chains and relies on exports coming from the Middle East, and there is a lot of different kind of impacts if we think about the shorter term basically. And that's obviously, I think, is one of the obvious reasons why the focus as of now is in the war in Ukraine and in the situation in Middle East. And basically, once again, China overall and the tensions in the Taiwan Strait are somewhat ongoing constantly on the background, but are not maybe getting the attention that they deserve if we truly think about the global geopolitical environment and possible impacts. Because basically it is estimated that even the embargo of Taiwan would most likely have bigger business impacts than the war in Ukraine. And I'm not talking about the humanitarian catastrophe that is happening as of now in Ukraine, obviously, but just from the perspective of business impacts. It is estimated that the business impacts coming from the embargo of Taiwan would be bigger than the business impacts from the war in Ukraine. And that also kind of like say something, and for me personally, that also means that obviously whenever we have these different kind of hotspots that are going on at the moment, and obviously we will and we have to monitor and update our scenarios, update our estimations when we get new information and new understanding. But at the same time, there is so much going on, and you kind of like you have to keep your focus also on these events that doesn't have enough room if we kind of like compare it to everyday discussions that we are having and where our focus is as of now.
Well, that's the reason, you and I like to have these conversations is, for Insight Forward, we're very much trying to look at strategically what's happening over the long term. What do we need to be aware of that we can track and monitor in that way, so that businesses can kind of like plan ahead and really understand kind of what markets are going to look like, in the longer term outlook, versus kind of maybe what you guys are doing, where you're trying to help businesses kind of monitor those things over a short term, make operational decisions on that daily or weekly basis. That's going to help them stay kind of safe and and keep making those right decisions, I guess.
I would say weekly and monthly basis, but definitely, and our focus is on the upcoming 6 months. So basically we are always creating, if we think about different geopolitical events, risks, hotspots we are creating the scenarios for next 6 months, and then we constantly monitor those developments within those different events. And then if necessary, we update the scenarios or their probabilities. And then we provide the understanding what comes to different business impacts that are related to those events and those scenarios. The access to raw materials, logistics, maritime routes, production, exports, reputation, energy, and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right about the perception that you guys are having within the Inside Forward, and how that helps the companies plan for the longer term. And then when compared to our solution, we are more focused on the short-term development and try to understand the business impacts that there is. Yeah, understanding and assessments.
Yeah, exactly. So Riku, if people want to get hold of Clock and Cloud Intelligence and they want to kind of see what you guys do and what you're about, how do they do that?
Yeah, they can go to our website. Obviously, anybody can contact me. Just feel free to contact me on LinkedIn, Riku Helgren, and then you can find the information from our LinkedIn page, Clock and Cloud Intelligence, and obviously you can go to our website, and we offer a free demo presentation about our app whenever there is people who wants to understand more about our solution and how we are able to provide the information that didn't exist on the markets before our app, basically.
Great. And then likewise for Insight Forward, we're pretty active on LinkedIn too. You can reach out to me, Ross Hill, directly, or go to the website, or go to our LinkedIn page. I'll also, we'll share all of our contact details at the end of this video as well. And also, just recently, we completed a pretty hefty strategic outlook for Israel after the war. So if people are interested in receiving that, then they should give me a shout as well. But otherwise, Rico, I think we covered quite a lot of ground there in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Once again. Yeah.
Yeah. The way these discussions go. But otherwise, well, I hope everybody watching kind of found this useful in some way. And I don't know, who knows? Maybe we'll put out another one of these again soon.